I caught my wife with my daughter's fiancé 3 days before the wedding. I was ready to kick down the door and end them both right there. But a cold hand covered my mouth from the shadows. It was my daughter. She did not have a single tear in her eye. She just whispered, "Dad, stop." I already knew. And it is so much worse than you think. If you have ever felt the knife of betrayal from the people you built a life for, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. My name is William Harper, but everyone calls me Bill. I am 70 years old, and I spent my life turning Chicago mud into skyscrapers. I thought I had seen every kind of snake in the real estate business, but it turns out the most venomous ones were sleeping under my own roof. It was 11 at night. The silence in my estate on Lake Geneva was heavy, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. I woke up with that familiar dryness in my throat and a sharp rhythmic thumping in my chest. My heart. The doctors had warned me to take it easy to avoid stress, to keep up with my medication. I reached for the amber pill bottle on the nightstand, my hand trembling slightly in the dark. It was empty. My wife Cynthia was supposed to refill it. She was always so attentive, so concerned about my health, constantly reminding me that I was fragile. Yet 3 days before the biggest event of our lives, she had forgotten the one thing that kept my heart beating properly. Or at least that is what I thought in that moment. I sat up, fighting the dizziness. I needed water. I needed to calm down. I slid my feet into my slippers and walked out of the master bedroom. The house felt like a museum at night. Cold marble floors, high ceilings, shadows stretching out from the antique furniture I had bought to please Cynthia. She loved this house. She loved the status it gave her. I just paid the bills. I made my way to the kitchen, passing the large French doors that looked out over the backyard. The moonlight was hitting the lake, turning the water into liquid silver. It should have been peaceful. But then I heard it. It was faint at first, a sound that did not belong. It wasn't the wind in the pines or the settling of the house. It was a rhythmic, guttural noise, a laugh, a moan. It was coming from the pool house. I stopped. The glass of water in my hand shook, spilling a few drops onto the floor. The pool house was a glass-walled structure I had built 5 years ago. It was heated, secluded, a place for relaxation. Who would be out there at this hour? My daughter Emily was staying in the East Wing with her bridesmaids. The staff had gone to their quarters hours ago. My first thought was intruders. We have security, but people get bold when they know a wedding is coming up. I set the glass down on the counter. I did not turn on the lights. I moved with the quiet heaviness of a man who has walked construction sites in the dead of night. I opened the back door and stepped into the chill of the Wisconsin air. The grass was wet against my ankles. I stuck to the shadows of the manicured hedges, moving closer to the soft golden glow emanating from the pool house. The blinds were drawn, but not all the way. There was a gap, just a sliver of clear glass near the handle. I got close enough to hear them before I saw them. The sounds were unmistakable. Passion. Lust. The kind of raw, unfiltered noise that makes you want to turn away. But I couldn't. I leaned in and looked through the crack. My heart didn't just skip a beat. It felt like it stopped entirely. There, on the custom Italian leather sofa I had imported last year, was Jason, my future son-in-law. The man who was supposed to marry my only child in 72 hours. He was shirtless, his back slick with sweat, his muscles flexing, and underneath him was a woman with blonde hair. Hair I had stroked that very morning. Hair that smelled of the expensive lavender shampoo I paid for. Cynthia. My wife. My partner of 10 years. The woman who had nursed me through my second heart surgery. I gripped the window frame so hard I thought the wood would splinter. The pain in my chest exploded, radiating down my left arm. I gasped, fighting for air, but my eyes refused to close. I watched as they separated, laughing, breathless. "That was good," Jason said. His voice was different. It wasn't the respectful, humble tone he used when he asked me for advice on business. It was arrogant, mocking. He walked over to the mini-fridge and grabbed a bottle of champagne. My champagne. Vintage Dom Perignon reserved for the wedding toast. He popped the cork and took a swig straight from the bottle. "You better be careful," Cynthia said. Her voice drifted out through the ventilation. She was fixing her silk robe, looking at him with a hunger that made my stomach turn. "If the old man wakes up and sees you gone, he might get suspicious." Jason laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "Let him wake up. What is he going to do? He can barely walk up the stairs without wheezing. Besides, you said he took his medicine." "I did," Cynthia replied, walking over to him and running a hand down his chest. "I gave him the special dose tonight. Double strength. He will be out cold until noon. By then we will have the final rehearsal, and he will be too groggy to notice anything." I froze. Special dose, double strength. The empty bottle on my nightstand flashed in my mind. She hadn't forgotten to refill it. She had been controlling it. "Just 3 more days, baby," Jason said, pulling her close. "Just get through the ceremony. Once that brat Emily signs the marriage certificate, the Harper Trust is unlocked. $50 million, and I get control as her husband. And don't forget my share," Cynthia purred. "I won't," Jason smirked. "We stick to the plan. I marry the girl. We get the access codes. And then—" "What happens to Bill?" Cynthia shrugged, a gesture so cold it froze the blood in my veins. "Well, his heart is a ticking time bomb. The excitement of the wedding, the stress, it might be too much for him. Maybe he has a stroke at the reception. Maybe he just goes to sleep and doesn't wake up. Either way, once he is gone and I have power of attorney over his personal assets, we are free." "And Emily?" Jason asked. "We will deal with her," Cynthia said, dismissing my daughter like she was a fly. "She is emotionally unstable. We can have her declared unfit to manage the estate. I will take over as trustee. You take your cut, divorce her in 6 months, and we meet in the Cayman Islands." Jason kissed her again. "God, you are brilliant." I was getting tired of playing the good boy from Detroit, pretending to care about his boring stories about cement and steel. "I hated every second of it," Cynthia laughed, changing his bandages, listening to him wheeze. "It smells like old age in that bedroom. I am ready to be a rich widow, Jason. I earned it." I staggered back from the window. My legs gave out, and I fell onto the wet grass. The pain in my chest was blinding, but it was nothing compared to the rage. It was all a lie, all of it. Jason. I had respected him. I saw myself in him. He told me he grew up in the projects in Detroit, that he fought his way out, that he worked 2 jobs to put himself through college. I respected that hunger. I opened doors for him. I introduced him to my contacts. I welcomed him into my family because I thought he would protect Emily and Cynthia. My God. I met her when she was a secretary at a rival firm. She seemed so kind, so uninterested in my money. She signed the prenup without reading it. She took care of me. I thought she loved me, but she was just waiting for me to die. And now that I was taking too long, she was going to speed up the process. They were going to kill me. They were going to steal my life's work. And worst of all, they were going to destroy my daughter. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, but they curled into fists. I was not dead yet. I was William Harper. I had crushed unions, outmaneuvered competitors, and survived 2 market crashes. I was not going to let 2 parasites take me down without a fight. I saw a heavy gardening spade leaning against the side of the pool house. It was solid steel, heavy, lethal. I grabbed it. The cold metal felt good in my hands. I stood up, the pain in my chest replaced by a surge of adrenaline. I was going to walk through that door. I was going to swing that spade until the laughter stopped. I was going to end it. Right now. I took a step toward the door. I raised the spade. Suddenly, a hand clamped over my mouth. An arm wrapped around my chest, pulling me back with surprising strength. I struggled, ready to swing the spade at whoever was stopping me, thinking maybe it was an accomplice. "Shh," a voice hissed in my ear. "Dad. Stop, do not make a sound." I froze. The grip loosened slightly, but the hand stayed over my mouth. I turned my head. It was Emily, my little girl. But she didn't look like a bride-to-be. She was wearing black running clothes, blending into the darkness. Her face was pale in the moonlight, but her eyes were dry. There was no shock, no tears, no heartbreak. She looked at the spade in my hand, then at the lit window of the pool house, and then directly into my eyes. "Dad," she whispered, her voice steady and cold as ice. "Put the shovel down. If you go in there now, you go to jail and they win." I pulled her hand away. They are—" I stammered, my voice barely a wheeze. "I know she cut me off." "You know I have known for 3 months," she said. I stared at her. My daughter, who I thought was blinded by love, who I thought was walking into a trap. She stood there in the shadows, looking more like me than I had ever realized. "Come with me," she whispered, tugging on my arm. "We need to go to the wine cellar. Now. Before they see us." "But, Dad," she said, and the intensity in her voice stopped me cold. "You think this is just cheating. You think this is just about money. It is worse, it is so much worse than you think, and we are going to make them pay for every single bit of it. But we do it my way." I looked back at the pool house one last time. I could still hear their laughter, ignorant, arrogant, thinking they had already won. I lowered the spade. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold night air. I looked at my daughter and nodded. We vanished into the darkness, leaving the vultures to celebrate a victory they would never have. The war had just begun. The heavy oak door of the wine cellar slammed shut behind us, sealing out the rest of the world with a thud that vibrated through the floorboards. The sudden silence was jarring. Just seconds ago, the night air had been filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant mocking laughter from the pool house. Now there was nothing but the hum of the climate control system and the sound of my own ragged breathing. Emily flipped the switch, and the amber track lights flickered on, illuminating rows of dusty vintage reds that I had collected over 30 years. I collapsed onto the worn leather armchair in the corner, clutching my chest. My heart was still hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a physical reminder of the poison I had just swallowed. I looked up at my daughter. She was leaning against the tasting table, her arms crossed over her chest. In the harsh light, she looked like a statue carved from ice. There was no trembling in her hands, no redness in her eyes. She looked terrifyingly composed for a woman who was supposed to be walking down the aisle in 3 days. "I need a phone, I gasped, struggling to get enough air into my lungs. "I am calling the police. I am calling the security team to throw them out. I am canceling the wedding, the caterers, the florists. Burn it all down." "Dad, stop," Emily said. Her voice was flat, monotone. "Stop," I shouted, my voice cracking with a mixture of rage and grief. "Did you not see what I saw? Your mother, my wife, and that animal. They are planning to kill me, Emily. They are laughing about it. I am not going to sit here and let them get away with it. I am going up there and I am going to expose them to the world." I tried to stand up, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, but my legs felt like lead. Before I could take a step, Emily was in front of me. She did not hug me. She did not comfort me. She raised her hand and slapped my cheek. It was not a hard slap, not violent, but it was sharp enough to snap my head to the side. The sting on my skin shocked me into silence. I stared at her, stunned. "Pull yourself together, William," she commanded, using my full name for the first time in her life. "You are the man who built the Harper Empire. Act like it. Panic gets us killed. Rage gets us nowhere. We need ice in our veins right now." I sank back into the chair, rubbing my cheek. The shock of her action had cleared the red fog from my vision. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I did not know this woman standing in front of me. This was not my little girl. This was a warrior. "You said you knew," I whispered, the fight draining out of me. How could you know and still let him touch you? Still let her smile at you?" Emily walked over to the wine rack, pulled out a bottle of brandy, and poured a generous amount into a crystal glass. She handed it to me. "Drink," she said. I took a sip. The liquid burned, grounding me. "I found out 3 months ago," she said, pacing the small room. "I noticed Jason had a second phone. A burner. He was sloppy. He thought I was just a rich, naive girl who was too busy planning flowers and seeding charts to notice. I hired a private investigator. Not one of your corporate guys. A nasty one from the city who digs up dirt for divorce settlements." She paused, looking at the label on the brandy bottle. "Jason isn't a personal trainer, Dad. He never was. His name isn't even Jason. It is Kyle Vance. He is a male escort from Las Vegas. High-end, very expensive, and very good at what he does." I felt the bile rise in my throat. An escort. Cynthia didn't meet him by accident. Emily continued. "She hired him 2 years ago. The contract was for $500,000. His job was to target me, to make me fall in love, to get me to the altar. Because she knew the terms of your will better than you do. She knew she couldn't touch the $50 million trust fund until I was married." My mind reeled, flashing back through the last 10 years. Cynthia. I met her when she was my executive assistant. She was quiet, modest. She wore cardigans from discount stores and brought tuna sandwiches for lunch because she said she was saving money for her niece's college fund. She never asked for jewelry. She never asked for a raise. When I proposed, she hesitated, saying she was afraid people would think she was after my money. She signed the prenuptial agreement without even reading it. I thought I had found a unicorn, a woman who loved Bill Harper, not the Harper fortune. But it was all a lie. The cardigans, the tuna sandwiches, the hesitation. It was a performance. A long con. She had invested 15 years of her life playing a character waiting for the big payout. She wasn't just a gold digger. She was a professional predator, and I was the mark. "She played us," I murmured, staring into the amber liquid in my glass. "She played us all." "She is good," Emily admitted, pouring herself a glass. "I will give her that. She is the best liar I have ever met. But she made one mistake. She underestimated me. She thought I was just your spoiled daughter. She didn't realize I have your blood in my veins." She took a sip and looked me dead in the eye. "So here is the situation, Dad. If you go up there now and cancel the wedding, what happens? They get kicked out. Sure, we avoid the immediate danger. But Cynthia, she walks away with the settlement from the divorce. The prenup gives her $1 million for every year of marriage. That is $10 million, Dad. She walks away rich. She wins. And Jason? He disappears back to Vegas to find another victim." I gripped the glass tighter. $10 million. After she planned to stop my heart. "Exactly," Emily said. "That is not justice. That is a severance package." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I do not want them to leave with a check. I want them to leave in handcuffs. I want them to rot in a federal prison cell for the rest of their miserable lives. But to do that, we need them to commit the crime. We need them to sign the papers. We need them to think they have won." She reached into the pocket of her silk robe and pulled out a small, clear vial. "You heard them talking about the medicine," she said. I nodded slowly. "The special dose." "I switched your pills last week," Emily said. "What you have been taking for the last 7 days is just a high-grade vitamin supplement. But this," she held up the vial. This is what she has been putting in your organizers. I had the lab run a spectrum analysis. It is digoxin mixed with a heavy sedative. It mimics heart failure. If you had taken this tonight, you wouldn't have woken up. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My wife had been handing me poison with a kiss every morning. We have the evidence of the poison, Emily said. But conspiracy to commit murder is hard to prove without a confession or an act. And fraud, we need them to sign the fraud into existence. We need the wedding to happen. We need the transfer of the trust to happen. She slammed the vial down on the table. I have a plan, Dad. It is risky. It is dangerous. And it requires you to be the best actor you have ever been in your life. You have to go back up there. You have to pretend you took that pill. You have to let them walk all over you for 3 more days. You have to let that man stand at the altar with me. You have to let them think you are a dying, senile old man who is losing his mind. She paused, her eyes searching mine. If we do this, we destroy them completely. We take everything. Their freedom, their reputation, their future. But if you can't do it, if you can't stomach it, say the word. And I will call the sheriff right now, but they will walk away with your money. I looked at my daughter. I saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had driven me to build skyscrapers out of nothing. She wasn't asking for permission. She was asking for a partner. I thought about Cynthia's laugh in the pool house. I thought about Jason's mocking voice. I thought about the 10 years of lies. I finished the brandy in one gulp and set the glass down on the table with a sharp clink. The fear was gone. The heartbreak was gone. All that was left was a cold, hard resolve. Tell me what I need to do, I said. Emily smiled. It was a terrifying smile. First, she said, we need to call Sarah Jenkins. Wake her up. We have a lot of paperwork to forge before sunrise. And Dad, you better practice your shaking hand. Tomorrow you need to look like you already have 1 foot in the grave. I stood up feeling steady for the first time that night. Don't worry, sweetheart, I said. I have closed deals with the mafia in the 80s. I can handle a couple of vultures. Let's play. The morning sun hit the dining room table with a brilliance that felt offensive. It was too bright, too cheerful. It illuminated the crystal juice glasses and the silver cutlery, making everything sparkle as if this were just another perfect morning in the Harper household. But to me, the light only served to highlight the cracks in the facade. I sat at the head of the table, my usual spot, feeling the cold mahogany beneath my forearms. I had spent the last 3 hours in the library with my daughter and my lawyer, forging documents and setting traps. But now I had to play the part of the frail, unsuspecting old man. I rubbed my eyes, feigning a grogginess I did not feel. The adrenaline from the night before was still coursing through my veins, keeping me sharper than I had been in a decade. But I let my shoulders slump. I let my hands tremble just enough to rattle the spoon against the saucer of my coffee cup. Good morning, darling. Cynthia breezed into the room, a vision of domestic perfection in a floral sundress. She smelled of vanilla and expensive moisturizer. She placed a plate of scrambled eggs and smoked salmon in front of me, her movements graceful and practiced. She leaned down and kissed my forehead. Her lips felt like a brand of ownership. A Judas kiss. You slept late, she cooed, pouring orange juice into my glass. You must have needed the rest. Today is going to be a big day. The rehearsal dinner is tonight, and we want you in top form. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small porcelain dish she used for my morning medications. Usually there were 3 pills, a white one for cholesterol, a small pink one for blood pressure, and a yellow one for my heart. Today there were still 3 pills, but the yellow one was gone. In its place sat a small cobalt blue capsule. I stared at it. It looked innocent enough, just a bit of gelatin and powder. But I knew what was inside. Digitalis. Sedatives. A chemical cocktail designed to stop a heart that was already tired. "Here you go, Bill," she said, her voice dripping with that cloying sweetness that used to make me feel loved, but now made my skin crawl. The doctor sent over a new prescription. He said this one is more efficient. It will help with the palpitations you have been having. I looked up at her. Her blue eyes were wide, innocent, filled with a concern that looked terrifiedly real. If Emily hadn't shown me the lab report, if I hadn't heard her in the pool house, I would have swallowed it without a second thought. I picked up the blue pill. It felt heavy in my fingers. "New prescription," I mumbled, slurring my words slightly. I do not remember him calling. "He called my cell silly," she laughed, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. "You know you don't like talking to doctors. Now take it. Your coffee is getting cold." I put the pill in my mouth. I took a sip of juice, but I did not swallow. I slid the capsule under my tongue, praying the coating wouldn't dissolve before I could get rid of it. I made a show of swallowing hard, grimacing as if it had a bad taste. "Good boy," she said, patting my hand. Just then Jason walked in. He was wearing a polo shirt that showed off the biceps he had built in the gym I paid for. He looked refreshed, energetic, the picture of youth and vitality. It was a stark contrast to the image I was projecting. "Morning, Bill," he said, pulling out the chair to my right. He didn't ask if he could sit. He just took the space. He grabbed a piece of toast from the center of the table and took a bite, chewing with his mouth open. "Morning, son," I wheezed. Jason poured himself coffee, looking around the room as if he were already measuring the drapes for replacement. "So, Bill," he started, leaning back in the chair. "I was looking over the company portfolio last night, just getting a head start before the wedding. I think we need to talk about the future." The pill under my tongue was bitter. I reached for my napkin, pretending to wipe my mouth, and subtly spit the capsule into the folds of the linen. I balled the napkin up in my fist and dropped it into my lap. "The future," I repeated, keeping my voice low and weak. "Yeah, the future," Jason said, his tone shifting from casual to condescending. "Look, the market is changing. Tech is where it is at. Real estate is dinosaurs playing in the dirt. Once Emily and I take over the trust, I am thinking we liquidate the commercial holdings in Chicago. Pivot to crypto and AI startups. High risk, high reward." I felt a vein throb in my temple. Liquidate the Chicago holdings. He was talking about buildings I had raised from the ground up. Landmarks, the legacy of the Harper name. He wanted to sell them for magic internet money. And he continued, pointing the toast at me. "We need to talk about you stepping down officially. Not just on paper. I mean, look at you, Bill. Your hands are shaking. You are tired. You deserve to rest. Go to that place in Florida Cynthia was talking about. Assisted living isn't what it used to be. It is like a resort." He was pushing. He was testing the boundaries, seeing how much of the senile old man act was real. He wanted to see if the lion still had teeth. I looked at him. I looked at the man who was essentially a high-priced prostitute my wife had hired to ruin my daughter. A man who grew up on the streets but had no idea what it meant to build something real. I straightened my back. Just for a second. I let the fog clear from my eyes and fixed him with the stare that had made union bosses stutter in the 80s. "You want to pivot to AI?" I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing the wheeze. "You want to sell Harper Tower? It is just business." Jason shrugged, though he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Let me tell you something about business, boy," I said, leaning forward. "When I broke ground on Harper Tower, I had to negotiate with the city, the mob, and the banks, and I did it without blinking. I poured that concrete while you were still in diapers in a trailer park in Nevada. Do not presume to teach me about the empire I built. You are here to marry my daughter, not to liquidate my life." The silence that followed was absolute. Jason froze his toast halfway to his mouth. His face went red, then pale. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected the old man to bite back. Cynthia dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. She looked at me, and for a split second the mask slipped. Her eyes weren't loving. They were hateful. They were sharp, cold daggers promising retribution. She stood up quickly, moving behind my chair and wrapping her arms around my shoulders. Her grip was tight, bordering on painful. "Oh, Bill," she said, her voice high and tight. "You are getting agitated. You know what the doctor said about your blood pressure. Jason didn't mean to upset you. He just wants to help. He wants to take the burden off your shoulders." She looked at Jason, her eyes signaling him to back off. "He is right, though, darling," she whispered in my ear. "You are confused. You are living in the past. We just want you to be safe. Maybe you should go lie down before the rehearsal. The medicine must be kicking in soon." I felt her hand check my pocket, probably looking for the pill bottle, or maybe just reassuring herself that I was still under her control. I let my body go limp again. I let the fire die out of my eyes. Maybe I muttered, looking down at my plate. Maybe I am tired. Emily walked into the room at that moment. She was dressed in her jogging clothes, looking flushed and healthy. She stopped in the doorway, sensing the tension in the room. She looked at Jason, then at Cynthia, and finally at me. "Good morning, family," she said, her voice bright and cheery. She walked over to my side of the table. "Dad, you look pale," she said. "I am fine, sweetheart," I said. "Just old." I grabbed her hand. In my palm, hidden by my fingers, was the balled-up napkin containing the blue pill. I squeezed her hand, feeling her fingers close around the paper. "Why don't you take Dad for a walk in the garden?" Cynthia suggested, clearly wanting me out of the room so she could strategize with Jason. The fresh air might help his mood. "That is a great idea," Emily said. "Come on, Dad. Let's go look at the roses." I stood up, leaning heavily on my cane. As I walked past Jason, I saw him glaring at me. He looked like a wolf that had been snapped at by a sheep. He was angry, but he was also confused. Good. Confused people make mistakes. We walked out onto the patio. As soon as we were out of sight of the kitchen windows, Emily opened her hand. The blue pill sat there, ominous and small against the white linen. She looked at it, then at me. "You did good, Dad," she whispered. "I will get this to the lab courier. They are waiting at the back gate." She put the pill in a small plastic bag she had in her pocket. "Jason is getting impatient," I said quietly. "He wants to sell the tower." "Let him want, Emily," said, her jaw setting. "In 48 hours, the only thing he will be selling is cigarettes for protection in a cell block." She took my arm, supporting me as we walked down the stone path. "Hold on, Dad. Just a little longer." I nodded, taking a deep breath of the morning air. It smelled of roses and damp earth. But underneath it, I could still smell the faint, lingering scent of betrayal. I was ready. Let them think I was weak. Let them think I was dying. Because when I finally rose from the dead, there would be hell to pay. I parked my car behind a dumpster at a place called Joe's Diner, a roadside stop about 10 miles from my estate, where the coffee tasted like battery acid and the patrons kept their eyes on their plates. It was the last place anyone would expect to find William Harper, and that was exactly the point. I pulled my collar up against the wind and hurried inside the bell above the door, announcing my arrival to a room full of truck drivers who didn't care if I lived or died. Sarah Jenkins was waiting in the back booth. She looked completely out of place in her tailored charcoal suit and silk blouse, a shark swimming in a goldfish bowl. Sarah has been my corporate counsel for 20 years. She is ruthless, efficient, and expensive. I have seen her tear apart union leaders and hostile takeover artists without blinking. But when I slid into the booth opposite her, the look on her face was something I had never seen before. It was pity. She didn't offer a greeting. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She simply slid a thick manila envelope across the sticky laminate table. The surface was stained with coffee rings and grease, a fitting backdrop for the filth we were about to uncover. "You are not going to like this, Bill," she said, her voice low and tight. I picked up the envelope. It felt heavy, heavier than paper should feel. I opened the clasp and dumped the contents onto the table. Photographs spilled out. Dozens of them. But they weren't of buildings or contracts. They were mugshots. I picked up the one on top. The man in the photo looked younger, his hair was longer, and he had a scruffy beard, but the eyes were unmistakable. They were the same cold, calculating eyes that had looked at me across the breakfast table just hours ago. "Meet Kyle Vance," Sarah said, tapping a manicured fingernail on the photo. "Also known as Ryan Miller. Also known as Seth Graves. But you know him as Jason." I stared at the image. My future son-in-law. The man who claimed he worked his way up from sweeping floors in a gym. "He is wanted in Nevada, Arizona, and Florida." Sarah continued reciting the facts like she was reading a court deposition. Fraud. Identity theft. Grand larceny. His specialty is targeting wealthy widows. He finds them at resorts or casinos, charms them, drains their accounts, and vanishes before they realize what happened. He isn't a personal trainer, Bill. He is a predator. I shuffled through the papers. Police reports. Witness statements from women who had lost everything. One woman had lost her home. Another had attempted suicide. This was the man sleeping under my roof. This was the man touching my daughter. But how, I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and confusion. How did he get a background check? We ran one when I hired him. It came back clean. Sarah pulled another sheet of paper from the stack. It was a credit card statement. My credit card statement. The one I gave to Cynthia for household expenses. "Look at the highlighted charge," she said. I squinted at the line item. A charge for $50,000 to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. It was dated 2 years ago. "Cynthia didn't just hire him," Bill, Sarah said. "She bought him. That 50 grand paid for a new identity. New social security number, new birth certificate, a clean credit history. She used your money to build the Trojan horse she invited into your home." I felt sick. Physically sick. I pushed the papers away, as if touching them would contaminate me. Cynthia had financed her own affair, and my destruction with my wallet. The audacity was breathtaking. "But that is not the worst part," Sarah said. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small sealed plastic bag. Inside was the blue pill Emily had given her courier this morning. "We got the expedited toxicology report back an hour ago," she said. Her voice dropped to a whisper, forcing me to lean in. "It is not heart medication, Bill. It is a cocktail. High-dose sedatives mixed with a powerful coagulant." A coagulant, I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "It thickens the blood," Sarah explained. "It promotes clotting. For a man with your cardiac history, taking this is like playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun. It isn't designed to kill you instantly. It is designed to induce a massive stroke or a pulmonary embolism. If you take this for a week, especially with the stress of a wedding, the alcohol, the fatigue, your heart will just stop, or a clot will hit your brain." I stared at the innocent-looking blue capsule. It was a bullet. A slow-moving chemical bullet. "It gets worse," Sarah said, her eyes locking onto mine. "Because of your history, no coroner would look twice. An old man with a bad heart dies after the excitement of his daughter's wedding. It is tragic, but it is natural. There would be no autopsy. She would have you cremated within 24 hours. It is the perfect murder, Bill." The diner suddenly felt very small. The air was too hot. The smell of grease was suffocating. I realized with a jolt of absolute terror that my wife wasn't just a gold digger. She wasn't just a cheater. She was a killer. She had looked me in the eye this morning, kissed my forehead, and handed me death in a porcelain dish. She wasn't waiting for nature to take its course. She was guiding the reaper's hand. I stood up so fast the booth squealed against the floor. Heads turned, but I didn't care. "That is it," I snarled, grabbing the edge of the table to steady myself. "I am done. I am going to the sheriff. Right now. I have the pill. I have the report. I have the fake ID. I am going to put them both under the jail." Sarah didn't move. She didn't stand up. She just looked at me with that cold attorney logic. "Sit down, Bill." "No," I shouted. "She is trying to kill me, Sarah. I am not going back to that house to sleep next to a monster." "Sit down," she snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. I hesitated. Sarah never raised her voice. I slowly lowered myself back into the booth, breathing hard. "If you go to the police now," she said, her voice returning to its calm, measured tone, "what do you think will happen? They will arrest Jason for the outstanding warrants. Sure, he goes away for a few years for fraud. But Cynthia," she leaned forward, "Cynthia will claim she didn't know what was in the pills. She will claim the doctor made a mistake or the pharmacist mixed up the prescription. She will say she was a victim of Jason too, that he conned her just like he conned the widows. Without proof of intent, without proof that she knew the pills were lethal, she walks. She divorces you. She takes half your assets because the prenup doesn't cover accidental poisoning. She walks away with $50 million of your hard-earned money, Bill. Is that what you want?" I stared at her, the reality of the legal system crashing down on me. She was right. Cynthia was slippery. She would play the weeping, confused wife and she would get away with it. "So what do we do?" I hissed. "Do I just let her poison me?" "No," Sarah said. "We let her think she is succeeding. We need the final act. We need the signature." She pulled out a fresh legal pad. "We need them to sign the documents transferring the trust. We need to catch them in the act of trying to steal the company. But more importantly, we need a confession. We need them to say it out loud when they think they have won." She looked at the blue pill again. "Emily told me about the plan. It is risky, Bill, incredibly risky. You have to go back there. You have to pretend to be deteriorating. You have to feign the symptoms of the stroke she is trying to induce. You have to make them feel safe enough to brag. Because when arrogant people think they have won, they get sloppy. They talk." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I had to go back. I had to eat dinner with them. I had to let her touch me. "And the debt?" I asked. Sarah smiled, a thin, shark-like smile. "I drafted the papers last night. The document they will be signing after the ceremony looks like the transfer of the Harper Trust. The cover page is legitimate. The legal jargon is dense. But the exhibits, the appendices, they won't bother to read because they are too busy counting their money. Those transfer personal liability for the Harper Logistics debt directly to the signatories. $15 million of toxic debt." She tapped the table. "The moment they sign that paper, they don't just lose the fortune. They inherit the anchor. They will be bankrupt within seconds. And with the video evidence Emily is setting up, we will have them for conspiracy to commit murder. Cynthia goes to prison for life. Jason goes to prison for life. And you walk away clean." I looked at the mugshot of Kyle Vance. I looked at the deadly blue pill. I thought about my daughter, who was brave enough to set this trap. I thought about the empire I had built from dirt. I realized then that I wasn't the victim here. I was the bait. And if I played my part right, the trap would snap shut with enough force to break their necks. I picked up the pill and put it in my pocket. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "I will go back. I will take their abuse. I will play the dying old man." I stood up, buttoning my jacket. "But tell the police to be ready, Sarah. Because when I drop the act, I want to hear the sirens before the applause stops." Sarah nodded and gathered the files. "They will be waiting, Bill. Just don't die on us before the wedding." I walked out of the diner and into the blinding afternoon sun. I felt like a soldier marching back to the front lines. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, burning hatred. I was going home to my wife, and God help her. The rehearsal dinner was held in the grand ballroom of my estate, a space I had designed to host governors and senators, not the circus of vultures that currently occupied it. 5 round tables were draped in ivory linen, set with the finest china, and centered with arrangements of white hydrangeas that cost more than the car I drove in college. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck and expensive perfume, but all I could smell was the rot of betrayal. I sat at the head table flanked by the two people plotting my murder. To my left was Cynthia, wearing a diamond necklace I had bought her for our 5th anniversary, the stones glittering against her skin like cold stars. To my right sat Jason, or Kyle, or whatever name the con artist was using this week. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, likely paid for with the credit card I had foolishly given my wife. The room was filled with our closest friends, business partners, and distant relatives. People who respected William Harper. People who feared me. But as I looked out at their faces, I realized they were looking back at me with something I despised more than hatred. They were looking at me with pity. Jason stood up, tapping a silver spoon against his champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound cut through the murmurs of conversation, bringing the room to a hushed silence. He flashed that megawatt smile, the one that had charmed my daughter and fooled me for 2 years. He looked every inch the devoted son-in-law, the future of the Harper Empire. "Thank you all for coming," Jason began, his voice smooth and projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "Tonight is about Emily and me, about our love, but it is also about family. And you cannot talk about this family without talking about the patriarch, the legend, William Harper." He gestured toward me, and a round of polite applause rippled through the room. I forced the corners of my mouth up into a weak, trembling smile. Under the table, my fists were clenched so hard my fingernails were digging into my palms. "Bill built this world we are standing in." Jason continued, his tone shifting, dropping into a register of somber concern. "He is a titan of industry, a man of steel, which makes it, well, it makes it that much harder to see the toll that time takes on even the strongest among us." I stiffened. Here it comes. The narrative shift. The gaslighting. "You know," Jason said, chuckling softly, as if sharing a fond but sad family secret. "Just yesterday, Bill and I were in the study. We were looking at blueprints for the new downtown complex. And Bill, he looked at me and he asked me who I was. He thought I was the delivery boy." A ripple of uneasy laughter and sympathetic murmurs went through the crowd. It was a lie. A bold-faced, disgusting lie. I had never forgotten a face in my life. I remembered the name of the man who poured the foundation for my first building in 1982. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to grab the wine bottle and smash it across his lying mouth. I wanted to roar at the room that I was sharper than all of them combined. But then I caught Emily's eye from across the table. She was staring at her plate, but her hand was resting on the tablecloth, one finger tapping a slow, steady rhythm. "Wait, wait, wait." Jason wasn't finished. He was enjoying this. He was building the coffin around me, nail by nail. "And it hurts, you know." He continued, pacing a little, playing the room like a fiddle. "It hurts to see him wander into the garden and forget how to get back to the house. Last week we found him by the lake, calling out for his first wife, Margaret. He thought it was 1995. He didn't even recognize Cynthia." The room went deadly silent. That was a low blow. A strategic, vicious strike designed to humiliate me and validate Cynthia's position as the long-suffering caretaker. I felt the blood rushing to my face. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I looked at my business partners, men I had negotiated with for decades. They were shaking their heads, whispering to their wives. They believed him. They bought the performance. They saw a frail old man in a wheelchair, not the shark who had eaten them alive in boardrooms. "It broke my heart," Jason said, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "But that is why we are here. To support him. To take the burden of the company off his shoulders so he can rest. So he doesn't have to worry about complex decisions anymore. Emily and I, we are ready to carry the torch, even if Bill doesn't always remember handing it to us." He raised his glass. "To Bill Harper. May he find peace in his twilight years." To Bill, the room echoed a chorus of sympathy that sounded like a death knell. I knew what I had to do. The script called for a performance, And if they wanted a senile, deteriorating old man, I would give them an Academy Award performance. I reached for my wineglass. My hand hovered over the stem. I focused on the muscles in my forearm, forcing them to twitch. I let the tremors start in my fingers and travel up to my wrist. I made my hand shake violently, uncontrollably, mimicking the side effects of the poison they thought I was taking. I grabbed the glass, but I didn't lift it. I let my hand spasm. The glass tipped over. Red wine, dark as blood, flooded across the pristine white tablecloth. It soaked into the linen, spreading rapidly toward Jason's expensive tuxedo. It dripped onto the floor with a wet, splattering sound. I let out a confused, garbled noise, half gasp, half groan. I let my head loll to the side, my eyes losing focus, staring blankly at the spreading stain. "Oh no," I mumbled, slurring the words, until they were barely recognizable. The blueprints. Margaret. The room gasped. It was perfect. It was humiliating, degrading, and absolutely perfect. Jason jumped back, brushing at his jacket, but he quickly recovered his mask. He looked at the guests with a tragic expression that said, "See, I told you." "Dad." Emily cried out, playing her part, rushing to my side with a napkin. But it was Cynthia's reaction that seared itself into my soul. She didn't jump. She didn't look surprised. She leaned over to Mrs. Covington, the biggest gossip in Lake Geneva, who was sitting at the next table. Cynthia didn't whisper quietly enough. She wanted to be heard. "Poor dear," Cynthia said, shaking her head, her voice dripping with fake sorrow. "He is getting worse by the hour. The doctor says the dementia is aggressive. Honestly, looking at him tonight, I do not think he will make it through the year. It is a mercy, really. His mind is already gone. The body is just catching up." I heard every word. I heard the dismissal. I heard the calculation. She wasn't talking about a husband she loved. She was talking about an obstacle she was about to remove. She was writing my obituary while I was sitting right next to her. I let Emily dab at the wine on my shirt. I let my head hang low, chin to my chest, hiding the fire that was burning in my eyes. "I am sorry," I whispered, letting my voice crack. "I made a mess." "It is okay, Dad," Emily said, her hand squeezing my shoulder hard. "A signal. We got them. They bought it." Cynthia stood up, taking charge. "Let's get him upstairs," she announced to the room. "He is exhausted. The excitement is too much for his heart." She grabbed my arm. Her nails dug into my bicep, sharp and cruel. It wasn't a supportive grip. It was the grip of a jailer escorting a prisoner back to his cell. Jason came to my other side. Together they hoisted me out of the chair. I leaned my weight on them, making myself heavy a burden. As they walked me out of the ballroom, leaving the hushed guests behind, I looked at Jason's face. He was smiling, a tiny, triumphant smirk that he thought no one could see. He thought he had just delivered the eulogy for my reputation. He thought he had just successfully declared me incompetent in the court of public opinion. He had no idea. He thought he was walking a senile old man to bed. He didn't realize he was walking a suicide bomber into the bunker. I shuffled my feet, dragging them on the carpet. I let out a wheezing cough. But inside my mind was a steel trap. I was recording everything, every insult, every lie, every touch of their treacherous hands. "Enjoy the applause, Jason," I thought, as we reached the stairs. "Enjoy the wine. Enjoy the victory lap. Because tomorrow the bill comes due. And the interest rate on betrayal is higher than you can ever afford." The bedroom was dark, save for a sliver of moonlight cutting across the Persian rug. I lay still, my breathing shallow and rhythmic, mimicking the deep sleep of the medicated. But under the heavy duvet, my body was rigid. My hand rested on my chest, right over the pocket of my silk pajamas. Inside that pocket was a pen, a silver Mont Blanc that Sarah had given me years ago. Only this morning, Emily had swapped out the ink cartridge for a high-fidelity recording device. It was 2 in the morning. The house had finally fallen quiet after the rehearsal dinner debacle. The guests were gone. The staff was asleep. But I knew the vultures were not resting. They would come to check on their prey. They always did. I heard the doorknob turn. It was a slow, deliberate sound. A shaft of hallway light sliced through the room, hitting my face. I didn't flinch. I kept my eyes closed, my mouth slightly open, letting out a soft, wet snore. "He is out," Jason's voice whispered. It sounded loud in the silence. "Close the door," Cynthia hissed. "We do not need the maid walking by." The door clicked shut, plunging the room back into semi-darkness. I heard their footsteps on the carpet. They stopped right by the bed. I could smell them, the stale scent of champagne on Jason's breath. The cloying perfume Cynthia wore now mixed with the sweat of a long night of scheming. I felt a hand wave in front of my face, then a sharp pinch on my arm. Cynthia. Testing my reflexes, testing the depth of my coma. I forced my muscles to remain slack. I let my head loll to the side. "He is gone to the world," Cynthia said, her voice devoid of the warmth she used in public. The double dose did the trick. "Did you see him at dinner spilling the wine, drooling?" It was pathetic. It was perfect. Jason chuckled. Everyone bought it. Even his business partners were looking at him like he was a broken toy. We established the narrative beautifully. Senile, unstable, dying. I lay there absorbing their cruelty like a sponge. Every insult was fuel. Every laugh was a justification for what I was about to do to them. "So what is the play for tomorrow?" Jason asked. He walked over to my dresser. I heard the clink of my watch being picked up and set down. He was already shopping in my room. "Tomorrow is the finale," Cynthia said. She sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under her weight. She smoothed the hair back from my forehead, a gesture that would have looked tender to an observer, but felt like a spider crawling on my skin. "We get through the ceremony," she continued. "Then we go to the signing room. The notary will be there. He signs the transfer of the trust. You sign as the new trustee. I sign as the witness and guardian. Once the ink is dry, the company, the accounts, the properties, it is all ours." And then Jason asked. Then Cynthia said, her voice dropping to a chilling, matter-of-fact tone, "We celebrate. I will bring him his evening warm milk, just like always. Only this time I am going to empty 3 capsules into it." "3?" Jason asked. "Isn't that risky?" "It is necessary," she replied. 3 capsules of the compound will trigger a massive cardiac event within an hour. Think about it, Jason. It is poetic. The father of the bride, overwhelmed by the emotion of the day his heart gives out on his daughter's wedding night. It is a tragedy. A headline. She laughed softly. "And the best part, no one will ask questions. He is 70. He has a history of heart disease. He publicly displayed symptoms of deterioration tonight. The doctor will sign the death certificate before the body is even cold. Cremation by Monday morning. No autopsy. No evidence. Just a grieving widow and a rich inheritance." I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. She had it all planned. The timeline, the method, the cover story. She wasn't just killing me. She was erasing me. "What about Emily?" Jason asked. I heard the sound of a lighter flicking, then the smell of cigarette smoke. He was smoking in my bedroom. "That brat Cynthia spat. She is the loose end. But don't worry, I have a plan for her too." "Tell me," Jason said. "Once the trust is under my control and Bill is out of the way, you file for divorce. Immediately." "On what grounds?" Jason asked. "Infidelity," Cynthia said. "Mental instability." "It doesn't matter. We will manufacture whatever we need. I will control the purse strings. I will cut off her access to the accounts. She has never worked a day in her life. She won't have the money to fight us in court." She paused, taking a deep breath. I will offer you a settlement, Jason. $10 million cash. You take the money, you divorce her, and you leave her with nothing. She will be on the street in 6 months. Or maybe she will come crawling back to me begging for scraps. Either way, she is broken. 10 million, Jason whistled low. I like the sound of that. I lay there, my mind screaming. $10 million to destroy my daughter's life. That was the price tag on Emily's happiness. That was the value of my legacy. They stood in silence for a moment, admiring their own brilliance. I could feel the arrogance radiating off them. They thought they were gods playing with mortal lives. You know, Jason said, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. I almost feel bad for the old guy. He really thinks we are a family. He thinks what he wants to think, Cynthia said, standing up from the bed. He is a narcissist. He thinks everyone loves him because he writes checks. He never understood that love is expensive, but loyalty. Loyalty costs more than he can afford. She leaned down close to my face. I could smell the tobacco smoke on her breath now. Goodbye, William, she whispered. You had a good run. But it is my turn now. They walked toward the door. Get some sleep, partner, Cynthia said to Jason. You need to look like a blushing groom tomorrow, and you need to look like the grieving widow in waiting. Jason laughed. The door clicked shut. The light vanished. I opened my eyes. I stared up at the dark ceiling, my vision blurred. Tears, hot and angry, streamed down the sides of my face, soaking into the pillow. I didn't wipe them away. I let them flow. They were the last tears I would ever shed for Cynthia Harper. I reached into my pocket and clicked the top of the pen. The tiny red light blinked once, then went dark. Recording saved. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was a helpless, dying old man. They thought tomorrow was their coronation. I sat up in bed, the darkness wrapping around me like armor. They were wrong. Tomorrow wasn't a coronation. It was an execution. And I was the one holding the axe. I looked at the empty spot next to me where Cynthia usually slept. I looked at the photos of Emily on the mantel. I looked at the empire I had built outside the window. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. The sadness was gone. The grief was gone. In their place was a cold, crystalline clarity. I picked up the phone on the nightstand and dialed a number I had memorized. It rang once. Sarah. I said, my voice steady and strong in the darkness. I have the confession. They said everything. The poison, the plan, the money, everything. There was a pause on the other end, then Sarah's voice sharp and professional. Good. The police are briefed. The trap is set. Are you ready for tomorrow? I looked at the door they had just walked through. I have never been more ready in my life, I said. I hung up the phone. I lay back down, but not to sleep. I lay there and waited for the sun to rise on my daughter's wedding day. The day I would die, and the day William Harper would be reborn. Let them come. I was waiting. 3 a.m. is the hour of ghosts and guilty consciences. The hallway outside my bedroom was a tunnel of silence, the kind of deep, suffocating quiet that usually precedes a storm. I moved through it like a thief in my own home, clutching the silver pen that contained the audio evidence of my wife's treachery. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm, not out of fear this time, but out of a cold, focused anticipation. I had spent the last hour lying next to the empty space where Cynthia should have been, listening to the house settle, waiting for the right moment to slip away. I made my way down to the library on the ground floor. It was my sanctuary, a room lined with walnut shelves and filled with the smell of old paper and leather bindings. It was the room where I had negotiated the deals that built the Chicago skyline. It was fitting that this was where I would negotiate the deal that would tear down the parasites trying to steal it. When I opened the double doors, the scene inside looked like a war room. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight against the night. A single banker's lamp cast a pool of green light on the massive desk. Sarah Jenkins was already there, her laptop open, a portable printer humming softly in the corner. She looked impeccable even at this ungodly hour, her glasses perched on the end of her nose, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Emily was sitting in one of the wingback chairs, wrapped in a thick blanket, nursing a mug of black coffee. She looked up as I entered her eyes, dark and serious. "Did you get it?" Emily asked, her voice a hush. I reached into my pocket and placed the silver pen on the desk. Everything I said, sinking into the chair opposite Sarah. The plan, the poison, the timeline. They admitted to it all. They are planning to overdose me tomorrow night after the signing. They want it to look like a heart attack on your wedding night. Sarah stopped typing. She looked at the pen, then at me. Her expression was grim. "That is conspiracy to commit capital murder," she said. "With the toxicology report we already have, this puts them away for life without parole. We could call the FBI right now." "No," I said, leaning forward. "Not yet. If we call them now, we stop the crime, but we do not punish the intent. I want them to sign the papers. I want them to think they have won. I want to see the moment the light goes out in their eyes, when they realize they have signed their own death warrants." Sarah nodded slowly. She understood. She was a lawyer, but she was also a predator in her own right. She respected the kill. "Let's review the trap," she said, turning her laptop screen toward me. On the screen was a document titled "The Harper Family Irrevocable Trust Modification and Transfer of Assets." It looked magnificent. It was dense with legal jargon formatted on official letterhead and stamped with the necessary seals. It detailed the transfer of $50 million in liquid assets, the deeds to the Chicago commercial properties, and the controlling interest in Harper Development Group, to the joint custody of Jason Vance and Cynthia Harper. "This is the bait," Sarah explained. "To the untrained eye, and let's be honest, neither Jason nor Cynthia are legal scholars. This looks like the keys to the kingdom. It gives them power of attorney. It gives them access to the offshore accounts. It is exactly what they demanded." "It is perfect," I said, reading the text. "It is exactly what they think they deserve." But Sarah continued, clicking a tab to open a second document. "This is the reality." She pulled a physical file from her briefcase. It was old, the edges slightly yellowed. I recognized it immediately. It was the prenuptial agreement Cynthia had signed 10 years ago. "You remember this?" Bill Sarah asked. "I do," I said, running my hand over the cover. 10 years ago, Cynthia was playing the role of the humble, selfless secretary. She was so eager to prove she wasn't after my money that she told me she would sign anything. She didn't even read it. She just wanted the ring, Clause 13b. Sarah said, flipping to a page near the back. "The infidelity and moral turpitude clause." I smiled. It was a vicious little paragraph I had insisted on back when I still had a shred of cynicism left. If the spouse is found to be engaging in extramarital affairs or conspiring against the interests of the primary asset holder, all claims to marital assets are voided, Sarah read. Furthermore, any assets previously transferred or held in trust for said spouse are subject to immediate clawback. "That clause is the safety net," I said. "With the video from the pool house and the audio from tonight, she has violated 13b 1,000 times over. She gets nothing. No alimony. No settlement. She leaves with the clothes on her back." "Exactly," Sarah said, "but that just leaves them broke. It doesn't leave them destroyed. You said you wanted to bury them." "I did," I said, "and that is why I need you to draft one more document." I looked at Emily. She knew what was coming. "We had discussed this in the wine cellar." She nodded, her face hardening. "Do it, Dad," she said. I turned back to Sarah. "Do you remember the Detroit project?" I asked. Sarah winced. "Of course. Harper Logistics Hub. The one black mark on your record. It was a disaster. I had tried to expand into industrial shipping 5 years ago. We bought a massive tract of land outside Detroit that turned out to be a toxic waste dump. The environmental cleanup costs were astronomical. The zoning permits were denied. The project stalled, but the loans didn't. I had restructured the debt, hidden it away in a shell company to keep it off the main books of Harper Development. It was a $20 million anchor that I had been paying interest on for years. I want you to transfer the ownership of the Detroit Shell Company into the new trust they are signing for, I said. Sarah's eyes went wide. She took off her glasses. Bill, she said, her voice dropping, if you do that, you are transferring $20 million of toxic debt to them. Not just the company debt. You want to make them personally liable. I want you to attach a personal guarantee of debt assumption to the signature page, I said. Hide it in the appendices. Make it look like standard liability waivers for the property transfer. When they sign for the assets, they sign for the debt. Sarah sat back, a look of pure professional awe on her face. You are going to bankrupt them, she whispered. The moment they sign, the creditors will come after them personally. They will garnish Jason's wages if he ever gets a job. They will seize any assets Cynthia has hidden. They will be $20 million in the hole before they even walk out of the room. Can you do it? I asked. Sarah cracked her knuckles and pulled the keyboard closer. I can have the papers drafted in 20 minutes, she said. It is diabolical, Bill. It is the meanest thing I have ever seen in estate law. I love it. She began to type furiously. The sound was rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock counting down the seconds of my wife's life as a free woman. Emily stood up and walked over to the window, peering out through the heavy curtains at the dark lawn. He is from Detroit, she said softly. Jason, or Kyle. He told me stories about growing up there, about how hard it was. It is poetic, isn't it? The city he used as a sob story to con me is going to be the thing that buries him. It is justice, I said. While Sarah worked, I went to the wall safe behind the painting of the Harper Tower. I spun the dial left, right, left. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside were a stack of cash, emergency funds, and the original deeds to my empire. I took out the deeds. I placed them on the desk next to the fake papers Sarah was printing. We need to make it look real, I said. We need the physical weight of the paper. We need them to see the watermarks. When they see these, greed will blind them to the fine print. The printer whirred to life, spitting out page after page of dense legal text. These were the shackles, the chains. Sarah collated the documents, her hands moving with precision. She created 3 piles. One for me to sign, transferring the rights. One for Jason, accepting the trust. One for Cynthia, witnessing and accepting guardianship. She slid the personal guarantee into the middle of Jason's and Cynthia's stacks. It was page 42 of 60. They would never read it. They would be too busy popping champagne. Here is the kill switch, Sarah said, tapping the bottom of the page. Once this is notarized, the debt is theirs. It is irrevocable. Even if they scream fraud later, the 13B clause protects you. You can claim you were transferring assets in good faith, and they accepted the liabilities along with them. It is ironclad. I looked at the documents. They looked so official, so boring, just paper and ink. But they were lethal weapons. There is one more thing, I said. The police. I spoke to the captain an hour ago, Sarah said, not looking up from her stapling. They have the toxicology report. They have copies of the fake IDs. They are going to have officers in unmarked cars at the end of the driveway starting at noon. They will wait for my signal. And the signal, Emily asked. When Bill drops the act, Sarah said. When he stands up and speaks clearly. That is the cue. I will text the captain, and they will breach the room. We sat there in the library, the 3 of us, surrounded by the smell of old books and the fresh scent of laser-printed justice. The clock on the mantel chimed 4 times. The sun would be coming up soon. The birds would start singing. The caterers would start arriving to set up the wedding of the century. My wife and her lover were upstairs sleeping the deep, satisfied sleep of people who think they have committed the perfect crime. They were dreaming of yachts and private islands. They were dreaming of my funeral. I picked up the stack of papers. They felt heavy in my hands. Let's get some rest, I said, though I knew none of us would sleep. We have a wedding to attend. Emily walked over and kissed my cheek. You are a scary man, William Harper, she said. Only when I have to be, I replied. We turned off the lights and left the library in darkness. The trap set the jaws open, waiting for the vultures to land. The sun rose over Lake Geneva like a spotlight hitting a stage illuminating the final set piece of the grand deception. The grounds of my estate had been transformed into a vision of purity and excess. Thousands of white orchids had been flown in from Thailand, draping every archway and railing. The scent was overwhelming, a thick, sweet perfume that masked the underlying stench of treachery. Rows of white wooden chairs were arranged on the lawn facing the lake where the water sparkled deceptively calm under the morning light. It was the wedding of the century, a $1 million spectacle paid for by the man who was supposed to die before the honeymoon began. I stood in front of the mirror in my dressing room adjusting my tie. My hands were steady, but as soon as I stepped out that door, I knew I had to summon the tremors again. I had to become the frail, confused old man they expected. I practiced the slump of my shoulders, the vacant look in my eyes. It was harder today. The anticipation was a live wire in my chest, making me want to stand tall and roar. But I swallowed the pride. The trap needed bait, and I was the worm on the hook. I walked down the hall to the bridal suite. The door was ajar, and I could hear the murmur of the bridesmaids, the rustle of silk and tulle. I knocked softly and pushed the door open. The chatter stopped. The bridesmaids, young women in pale lavender dresses, looked at me with sympathetic smiles. They saw a dying father coming to see his daughter for the last time. "Can I have a moment with the bride?" I asked, my voice pitched low and wavering. The girls fluttered out like a flock of birds, leaving us alone. Emily stood by the window looking out at the gathering crowd. She was breathtaking. The dress was a masterpiece of lace and satin hugging her silhouette before cascading to the floor in a train that seemed to go on forever. Her hair was swept up, revealing the delicate curve of her neck. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale, but when she turned to face me, the illusion shattered. Her face was cold. Beautiful, yes, but cold as the marble floors in the foyer. There was no nervous blushing, no teary-eyed excitement. Her makeup was flawless, hiding the lack of sleep, but it could not hide the steel in her eyes. She looked like a queen preparing to sign a declaration of war. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I said, dropping the act for a moment. She walked over to the mirror and adjusted her veil. She didn't smile. "I look like a sacrifice," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. I walked closer to her. The weight of what we were about to do pressed down on me. This was my little girl. I was about to walk her down the aisle to a man who saw her as nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. A man who had slept with her stepmother in my pool house. "You do not have to do this," I said softly. "We can stop it now. We have the evidence. We can have the police arrest them before the ceremony starts. You do not have to say 'I do' to that monster." Emily turned to me. Her expression softened, but only slightly. It wasn't softness for the situation, but softness for me. "I am not doing this for him, Dad," she said. "And I am not doing it for the money." Then why, I asked. She reached out and straightened my boutonniere, a single white rose. "I am doing it for Mom," she whispered. The mention of Margaret. My first wife, the woman who had stood by my side when we had nothing but debt and a dream, hit me hard. "Mom built this empire with you," Emily continued, her voice gaining strength. "She sacrificed everything for this family. She worked double shifts so you could buy your first building. She missed vacations. She saved every penny. This legacy is hers as much as it is yours." Her eyes hardened, the ice returning. "I will not let that whore take a single cent of what my mother built. Not one penny. Cynthia thinks she can walk in here, poison you, and steal our life. She is going to learn today that she picked a fight with the wrong bloodline." I looked at my daughter and saw Margaret's spirit burning in her eyes. It was a fierce, protective fire. I realized then that I wasn't protecting Emily. We were protecting each other. We were soldiers in the same trench. Okay, I said, nodding. Let's go get them. She took my arm. Her grip was firm, grounding. Showtime, Dad, she said. Remember, you are weak. You are confused. You are dying. I slumped my posture, letting my mouth hang slightly open. I leaned heavily on my cane. We walked out of the suite and toward the grand staircase. The music started. Pachelbel's canon. Classic. Predictable. Just like the greed that was driving the two people waiting for us. We stepped out onto the lawn. The guests stood up, a sea of expensive fabrics and designer sunglasses. I saw them whispering as we passed. I saw the pity. Look at poor Bill. He barely knows where he is. It is so sad. I shuffled my feet, letting Emily guide me. Every step was a performance. I stumbled slightly on an uneven patch of grass, and a collective gasp went through the crowd. Emily steadied me, playing the part of the devoted daughter, supporting her fading father. At the end of the aisle, standing beneath an arch of white roses that looked like a funeral wreath, was Jason. He was smiling. It was the smile of a man who thinks he has won the lottery. He looked handsome, I had to give him that. The suit I paid for fit him perfectly. He looked like the dream groom. But I knew what lay beneath that suit. I knew the rot that festered in his soul. To his left in the front row sat Cynthia. She was dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, performing the role of the emotional mother of the bride. She looked at me as I approached, and for a second, behind the fake tears, I saw the impatience. Die already, her eyes seemed to say. Hurry up and die. We reached the altar. The music swelled and then faded. The silence that followed was heavy with expectation. Jason stepped forward. He reached out for Emily's hand. His eyes were bright, eager. He wasn't looking at his bride. He was looking at the key to the vault. I didn't let go of Emily immediately. I stood there trembling, letting the silence stretch out until it became uncomfortable. I looked at Jason. I let my eyes wander over his face, blank and confused, before slowly sharpening into a moment of lucid clarity. I took Emily's hand and placed it in his. His palm was sweaty. Jason leaned in to shake my hand, the picture of respect. Thank you, Bill, he whispered loud enough for the front row to hear. I will take care of her. I promise. I gripped his hand. I squeezed it just a little harder than a dying man should be able to. I pulled him in close, so close I could smell the expensive cologne he had bought with my money. I leaned to his ear, my lips brushing against his skin. Enjoy it, son, I whispered, my voice raspy but distinct. He pulled back slightly, looking at me, expecting a senile rambling. This is the peak, I said, holding his gaze. This moment right here. This is the highest point of your entire life. It is all downhill from here. Jason stared at me. For a second, confusion flickered in his eyes. He tried to decipher the meaning. Was it a blessing, a warning, a ramblings of a broken mind? Then his arrogance took over. He smiled a wide, victorious grin. He thought I was talking about the happiness of the wedding. He thought I was blessing his conquest. I will, Dad, he said, patting my shoulder patronizingly. I will enjoy every second of it. He turned back to the officiant, his chest puffed out, radiating triumph. He had the girl. He was about to get the money. He thought he was untouchable. I stepped back and sat down next to Cynthia. She reached over and patted my knee, her touch burning through my trousers. You did good, Bill, she whispered without looking at me. Just sit still now. It is almost over. I stared straight ahead, watching the man who was wanted in 3 states recite vows of eternal love to my daughter. I watched my wife smile at them, calculating her cut of the inheritance. Yes, I thought. It is almost over. The ceremony blurred into a series of hollow words and empty promises. I do. Till death do us part. When the officiant pronounced them man and wife, Jason kissed Emily with a fervor that looked passionate to the crowd, but looked like ownership to me. The guests cheered. Cynthia clapped louder than anyone. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, showered in white rose petals, I let a small, genuine smile touch my lips. Walk, Jason, I thought. Walk while you can. Because the ground beneath your feet is already gone. You just haven't fallen yet. The reception was in full swing. The sound of a jazz band playing upbeat standards drifted through the thick mahogany doors of the library, but inside the air was heavy and still. This was the inner sanctum, the place where the real business of the day was being conducted. We had left the guests enjoying champagne and hors d'oeuvres under the pretense that I needed a moment of quiet and that we had some administrative housekeeping to finalize before the honeymoon. The room was exactly as we had left it at 4 in the morning, except now the drapes were open, letting in the harsh afternoon light. Sarah Jenkins stood behind the massive desk, her face impassive, acting the part of the dutiful corporate attorney. On the desk lay 3 neat stacks of paper. The trap. I shuffled into the room, leaning heavily on my cane, my other arm gripped tightly by Cynthia. She wasn't supporting me. She was propelling me. She marched me toward the leather chair in front of the desk, like a prisoner to the gallows. "Sit down, William," she said, pushing me into the seat. Her voice was tight. The mask of the loving wife was slipping. She was close to the finish line, and her patience was evaporating. Jason and Emily followed us in. Emily stood by the window, her back to the room, looking out at the party. I knew she couldn't face them. She couldn't look at the man she had just married knowing he was a monster. Jason, however, was practically vibrating with energy. He bounced on the balls of his feet, his eyes locked on the documents. He looked like a wolf staring at a wounded deer. "Let us make this quick," Cynthia said, smoothing her dress. "The guests are waiting for the first dance. Sarah, are the papers ready?" "They are, Sue," Sarah said, her voice cool and professional. "As discussed, this is the transfer of the Harper Family Trust, along with power of attorney and the deeds to the commercial properties. It requires 3 signatures. Mr. Harper as the grantor, Mr. Vance as the primary beneficiary and trustee, and you, Mrs. Harper, as the witness and secondary guardian." "Perfect," Jason said, stepping up to the desk. "Oh, where do I sign?" "Not so fast," Sarah said, holding up a hand. "Mr. Harper signs first. The assets must be released before they can be accepted." She slid the thickest stack of papers toward me. On top was the cover page we had forged the night before. It looked impressive. Official. It promised wealth beyond imagination. But buried deep in the appendix, waiting like a landmine, was the transfer of the Harper Logistics debt. I looked at the papers. I let my head bobble slightly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my reading glasses, taking an agonizingly long time to unfold them and place them on my nose. Is this the will?" I asked, my voice trembling. "No, Bill," Cynthia snapped, leaning over my shoulder. "It is the trust. Remember, we talked about this. You are giving control to Jason and Emily so you can rest, so you do not have to worry about business anymore." "Oh," I said, blinking slowly behind the lenses. "Right. The trust. For the children." "Yes, for the children," she hissed. "Now pick up the pen." I reached for the heavy fountain pen Sarah had placed on the document. My hand shook violently. I hovered the nib over the signature line. I took a breath, and then I let the pen slip from my fingers. It clattered onto the desk and rolled onto the floor, landing with a soft thud on the Persian rug. "Oops," I mumbled. "Clumsy." Cynthia let out a noise that was half growl, half scream. She dropped to her knees, scrambling for the pen. When she stood up, her face was flushed with rage. She grabbed my hand, the one that had built skyscrapers, and shoved the pen back into my fingers. She squeezed my hand so hard I felt my knuckles pop. "Stop playing games, old man," she whispered in my ear, too low for Sarah to hear, but loud enough for me. Sign the damn paper or I will shove it down your throat. I looked up at her. I saw the greed. I saw the hatred. I saw the murderer behind the makeup. Okay, I said softly. Okay, Cindy. I will sign. I lowered the pen to the paper. I focused on the line. I didn't sign my usual sweeping signature. I signed a shaky, broken scrawl. William H. Harper. There, I said, dropping the pen again. It is done. Cynthia snatched the papers away before the ink was even dry. She handed them to Sarah, checking the signature like a hawk. Sarah nodded. It is valid, Sarah said. Now you, Jason, Cynthia commanded. Jason stepped up. He didn't even sit down. He grabbed the pen from the desk. This is it, he said, flashing a grin at Emily's back. The big leagues. He didn't read a word. He didn't flip a single page. He just flipped to the back, found the tab marked beneficiary, and scribbled his name with a flourish. Kyle Vance signing as Jason Vance. He was signing a legal document with a fake name, which was a felony in itself, but by signing the personal guarantee assignee attached to the back, he was also assuming liability for $20 million of toxic debt under any alias he used. Done, he said, tossing the pen down. We are rich. And finally, Mrs. Harper, Sarah said, sliding the last stack forward. Cynthia sat in the chair I had vacated. She took a moment. She looked at the papers with a look of pure, unadulterated lust. This was her moment, the culmination of 10 years of deception. She picked up the pen. She signed her name with precise, elegant strokes. Cynthia Marie Harper. Congratulations, Sarah said, gathering the documents and placing them squarely in her briefcase. She snapped the locks shut. The sound was like a gavel coming down. The transfer is complete. Cynthia stood up. She took a deep breath and her entire demeanor changed. Her shoulders straightened. Her face relaxed. The mask didn't just slip, she ripped it off and threw it on the floor. She turned to me. I was still sitting in the chair, slumped over, looking at my hands. Well, that is a relief, she said, her voice icy and loud. She walked over to the side table where a crystal decanter of scotch sat. She poured herself a drink neat. She didn't offer me one. She didn't offer Jason one. She took a sip and sighed. You have no idea how exhausting it is to pretend to care about you, Bill, she said. Jason laughed. He walked over and wrapped his arm around her waist. He kissed her on the cheek right in front of me, right in front of his new wife. You were amazing, baby, he said. We did it. I watched them. They were celebrating. They thought the ink on those pages was their ticket to paradise. They didn't realize it was the ink on their death warrants. I looked at Emily. She had turned around from the window. She wasn't crying. She was smiling. A cold, terrifying smile. Is it done? I asked, my voice suddenly clear. The tremor was gone. The wheeze was gone. It is done, Sarah said from the desk. They are legally liable. I sat up straight. I rolled my neck, working out the stiffness from hours of slouching. I stood up. I didn't use the cane. I left it leaning against the chair. I walked over to the decanter, my steps firm and steady. Jason and Cynthia stopped celebrating. They stared at me. Confusion rippled across their faces. Bill, Cynthia asked her glass halfway to her mouth. I poured myself a glass of scotch. A generous pour. I swirled the liquid, watching the light catch the amber depths. I took a sip. It was smooth. It tasted like victory. I turned to face them. I stood at my full height, 6 feet 2 inches of steel and concrete. I fixed them with a stare that could cut glass. You know, I said, my voice booming in the quiet room, rich and resonant. The thing about acting is you have to know when the scene is over. Cynthia took a step back. She looked at Jason. What is happening? She whispered. Why is he standing like that? Jason stepped in front of her, trying to regain control. Sit down, Bill, he barked. You are confused. You need your medicine. My medicine. I asked, taking another slow sip of scotch. You mean the blue pills? The digoxin and sedatives? The color drained from Jason's face so fast it looked like he had been slapped. I didn't take them, I said casually. I haven't taken them all week. But the lab boys tell me they are quite potent. Enough to kill a horse. Or a husband. Cynthia dropped her glass. It shattered on the floor, whiskey and shards of crystal exploding everywhere. You know, she stammered. I laughed. It was a dark, dangerous sound. I know everything, Cynthia. I know about the pool house. I know about the $10 million divorce settlement. I know about the warm milk you were planning to bring me tonight. I took a step toward them. They backed away, hitting the edge of the desk. You thought I was senile, I said, my voice dropping to a growl. You thought I was a helpless old man you could put down like a sick dog. You forgot who I am. I am William Harper. I eat sharks for breakfast. And you too? You are just minnows. I looked at Sarah. Show them what they just signed, Sarah. Sarah opened her briefcase again. She pulled out a copy of the appendix. Congratulations, Mr. Vance, Mrs. Harper, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. You are now the proud owners of Harper Logistics Detroit Holdings. What is that? Jason demanded. Is that the company? It is a shell company, I explained, enjoying the look of horror dawning on their faces. It holds the deed to a toxic waste dump outside Detroit. And more importantly, it holds the $20 million in environmental fines and defaulted loans associated with it. I smiled. And thanks to the personal guarantee you just signed, that debt isn't corporate anymore. It is personal. You owe the bank $20 million. Due immediately. Cynthia looked at the papers, then at me, then at the door. She looked like a trapped rat. This is a trick, she screamed. You can't do this. I am your wife. Not for long, I said. And definitely not with any money. I pointed to the large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall above the fireplace. Emily, would you do the honors? Emily picked up the remote. She pressed a button. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a cable news channel. It was a live feed from the security camera I had installed in the bedroom. But the audio was a recording from last night. We celebrate. Cynthia's voice filled the room, crisp and clear. I will bring him his evening warm milk. Empty 3 capsules into it. Massive cardiac event. The silence in the room was deafening as their own voices plotted my murder. Jason looked at the door. He was calculating the distance. He was going to run. Don't bother, son, I said. I nodded to Sarah. She pulled out her phone and sent a single text message. Now. From the front of the house, over the sound of the jazz band and the chatter of the guests, came a new sound. Sirens. Lots of them. Getting closer. I took another sip of scotch. The police are here, I said, and I think they have some questions about attempted murder. I looked at my wife and my son-in-law. They were trembling now. Real tremors, not fake ones. Checkmate, I whispered. The ink on the documents was still wet, glistening under the library lights like fresh blood. Sarah Jenkins closed her briefcase with a snap that sounded like a gunshot, signaling the end of the transaction. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the static electricity of a storm about to break. I remained slumped in my chair, my head bowed, my hands resting limp on my knees, maintaining the illusion of the defeated, feeble patriarch for just a few seconds longer. Then the laughter started. It began with Jason, a low, guttural chuckle that built into a roar of pure, unadulterated triumph. He didn't just step away from the desk. He strutted. He walked over to this bar, grabbed the neck of a crystal decanter, and took a swig straight from the vessel, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. The veneer of the polite, respectful son-in-law evaporated instantly, revealing the street thug beneath the tuxedo. It is done, he announced, his voice booming off the walnut paneling. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with malice. It is finally over. You know, Bill, I have to thank you. You made this almost too easy. He walked over to Cynthia, who was standing by the fireplace examining her fingernails, as if she hadn't just signed away her soul. Jason wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. It was a display of ownership, a flagrant violation of every boundary he had pretended to respect for 2 years. He kissed her neck, right there in front of me, in front of my daughter, in front of God and everyone. Look at him, Jason sneered, gesturing toward me with his free hand. He doesn't even know what day it is. Hey, old man, you can stop twitching now. You served your purpose. You signed the papers. Now you can go ahead and die. We are tired of waiting. I didn't move. I wanted them to dig the hole deeper. I wanted them to feel so safe, so victorious, that the fall would shatter every bone in their bodies. Cynthia pushed Jason away, gently laughing. She walked toward me, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She stopped a foot away from my chair. The look on her face was one of pure disgust. It was the look one gives to a dying insect before crushing it. You have no idea, she said, her voice dripping with venom. You have no idea how sick I am of you, William. I am sick of your stories. I am sick of your rasping breath at night. I am sick of the smell of you. You smell like decay. You smell like a corpse that forgot to stop moving. She leaned down, her face inches from mine. Do you think I ever loved you? She whispered, loud enough for the room to hear. I loved the checkbook. I loved the house. But you were just a job. And I have just clocked out. She straightened up and turned to Jason. Call the doctors in the morning, she said casually. Tell them he has taken a turn for the worse. After tonight, he won't be waking up, but just in case he survives the night, I want him committed. Tomorrow, I want him in the state facility, the one with the barred windows. I am done playing nursemaid. Jason laughed again. The loony bin. Perfect. We will visit you on holidays, Bill. Maybe bring you a coloring book. The disrespect was physical. It was a slap in the face that burned hotter than any fire. They were celebrating my destruction while standing on the foundation I had built. They were dancing on my grave before I was even in it. It was time. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of my own home. I stopped the shaking in my hands. I straightened my spine vertebra by vertebra, rising from the chair, not like an invalid, but like a king reclaiming his throne. The change was subtle at first, then terrifyingly absolute. My shoulders squared, my chin lifted. The vacant, watery look in my eyes vanished, replaced by the cold, hard stare of a man who had stared down mob bosses and corrupt senators. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. Jason flinched, perhaps thinking I was reaching for a weapon. In a way, I was. I pulled out a small black remote control. Jason frowned. Cynthia paused, her glass of celebration halfway to her lips. You think I am senile? I asked. My voice was not the wheeze they were used to. It was a baritone rumble, steady and strong. It filled the room, bouncing off the books and the walls. You think I am confused? You think I am weak? I took a step toward them. They instinctively took a step back. The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The predator had become the prey. Bill, Cynthia stammered, the color draining from her face. What? Why are you standing like that? I didn't answer her. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an explanation. Not yet. I pointed the remote at the far wall where a large oil painting of the Lake Geneva shoreline hung. I pressed a button. With a mechanical whir, the painting slid upwards, revealing a massive 80-inch flat-screen monitor recessed into the wall. It was part of the security system upgrade I had installed months ago, a detail Cynthia had never bothered to notice because she was too busy planning my funeral. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a wedding slideshow. It wasn't a collection of happy family memories. The image was grainy, shot in low light, but the clarity was undeniable. It was the interior of the pool house. The date stamp in the corner read, 3 days ago. 11th. The room filled with the sounds of heavy breathing and rustling fabric. On the screen, two figures were intertwined on the sofa. There was no mistaking who they were. The camera angle I had adjusted myself caught their faces perfectly. Cynthia gasped a sound like all the air leaving her body at once. Her hand flew to her mouth. Jason froze, his eyes bulging. But the video was just the appetizer. The audio was the main course. "Just 3 more days, baby," the voice of Jason on the screen said, clear and arrogant. "Just get through the ceremony. Once that brat Emily signs, I get control." And then the voice of my wife. My loving, devoted wife. "His heart is a ticking time bomb. Maybe he has a stroke. Maybe he just goes to sleep and doesn't wake up." I pressed a button on the remote, skipping forward. The scene changed. Now it was a black screen, just an audio waveform bouncing in green light. The recording from last night. "I will bring him his evening warm milk. Empty 3 capsules into it. Massive cardiac event." The words hung in the air, toxic and undeniable. Conspiracy to commit murder. Spoken in their own voices. Played back at maximum volume in the room where they thought they had just won the world. I paused the recording. The silence that followed was louder than the screaming had been. Cynthia looked at the screen, then at me. Her face was a mask of absolute horror. The arrogance was gone. The cruelty was gone. All that was left was the raw, naked fear of a woman who realizes the trapdoor has just opened beneath her feet. You recorded us," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "I recorded everything I said, my voice cold as the grave. I watched you. I listened to you. I let you play your little game. I let you think you were smarter than me." "No," she screamed. It was a primal sound, a shriek of denial. She lunged. She didn't run for the door. She ran for me. Her hands were clawed, her eyes wild. She was going to try to tear the remote from my hand, as if destroying the device would destroy the truth. "Give it to me," she shrieked, closing the distance in a frenzy of taffeta and rage. "You old bastard! Give it to me." I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. Before she could reach me, a blur of white silk intercepted her. Emily. My daughter didn't just step in front of me, she hit Cynthia with the force of a linebacker. She shoved her hard right in the chest. Cynthia flew backward. She tripped over the hem of her mother-of-the-bride dress and crashed to the floor in a heap of expensive fabric and humiliation. "Do not touch him!" Emily roared. She stood over Cynthia, her hands balled into fists, her wedding dress pooling around her like armor. She looked magnificent. She looked terrifying. "You stay away from my father," Emily spat. "You are done, Cynthia. It is over." Cynthia scrambled backward on the rug, looking up at Emily, then at me, then at Jason. "Jason," she screamed. "Do something. He has the evidence. Get the remote." Jason looked at me. He looked at the remote in my hand. He looked at the screen where his own voice was still plotting my death. He took a step toward me, his hands twitching. The street thug was surfacing. He was calculating the odds. He was younger, stronger. He thought he could take me. I slipped the remote into my pocket and picked up my cane. I didn't lean on it. I held it like a baseball bat. "Come on, son," I said softly. "Try it. Give me a reason. I have been waiting 40 years to hit someone with this." Jason hesitated. He looked at Sarah Jenkins, who was standing calmly by the desk, holding her phone up, recording the entire thing. He looked at the door. He realized then that this wasn't a negotiation. It was an ambush. He backed down, raising his hands in surrender. "Whoa, hold on, Bill," he stammered, his voice cracking. Let's talk about this." It was just talk, right? Just venting. We didn't do anything. "You signed the papers," I said. "That is doing something." I looked down at Cynthia, who was weeping on the floor, ruining her makeup. "Get up," I said. "You look pathetic." She looked up at me, mascara running down her cheeks. "Bill, please," she sobbed. "I am sorry. It was him. He made me do it. He brainwashed me. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Save it for the jury. Cynthia. I turned to Sarah. Bring them in. Sarah tapped her phone screen. The heavy library doors burst open. The sound of heavy boots on hardwood floor echoed through the house, drowning out the jazz band outside. 4 uniformed police officers marched into the room, their hands on their holsters. Behind them was the chief of police, a man I had played poker with for 20 years. Cynthia screamed again, but this time it wasn't in anger. It was in defeat. The masks were off. The play was over. And the curtain was coming down hard. The library was suddenly crowded, filled with the heavy presence of authority. The 4 officers fanned out, blocking the exits, their hands resting casually near their belts, their eyes scanning the room for threats. But the only threats in the room were currently hyperventilating on my Persian rug. Chief Frank Miller, a man I had known since we were both young men trying to make a name in this town, stepped forward. He didn't look at Cynthia or Jason. He looked at me, gave a curt nod, and tipped the brim of his hat. He didn't need to say a word. The cavalry had arrived, and the siege was over. Sarah Jenkins stepped out from behind the desk. She walked past the trembling figures of my wife and her lover, her heels clicking a rhythmic beat of finality on the hardwood. She held the stack of freshly signed documents in her hand, waving them slightly like a fan. She stopped in front of Jason, who was pressed against the bookshelf, looking like a trapped animal searching for a hole in the fence. "Before the officers take you into custody," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension, like a scalpel, "I thought you might want to know exactly what you just accomplished today." Jason stared at her, sweat beading on his forehead. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were darting from the police to the window, calculating a jump he would never make. Sarah opened the folder. She didn't look at the text. She had written it after all. She knew every lethal clause by heart. "Congratulations, Mr. Vance," she said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "And you too, Mrs. Harper. You are now the proud sole owners of Harper Logistics Detroit Holdings." Cynthia looked up from the floor. Her mascara streaked her face, a mask of confusion and terror. What, she croaked. "The trust. We signed for the trust." "You signed for the transfer of assets labeled under Schedule A," Sarah corrected her. "And if you had bothered to read Schedule A instead of counting your chickens, you would have seen that the only asset in that particular portfolio is a defunct industrial site outside of Detroit." She flipped the page, holding it up so they could see the bold print. "It is a toxic waste dump, Cynthia," I said, stepping forward. "I bought it 5 years ago. It was a mistake. A $20 million mistake. The EPA fines alone are astronomical. The cleanup costs are bankrupting. It is a financial black hole." Jason's face went gray. The arrogance that had defined him for 2 years, the swagger of the street-smart hustler, evaporated instantly. "But the 50 million, he stammered. "The liquid assets. The tower." I laughed. It was a sound of pure release. "The $50 million was moved yesterday morning," I said. "I transferred the entire Harper Family Trust into a new, irrevocable charitable foundation dedicated to the victims of fraud and elder abuse. The tower. It is in a holding company owned solely by Emily." I took a step closer to Jason, invading his space. "You didn't sign for my fortune, son. You signed for my mistakes. And thanks to that little personal guarantee Sarah slipped onto page 42, that debt isn't corporate anymore. It is yours. You personally owe the bank and the federal government $20 million. Jason's knees buckled. He grabbed the bookshelf to stay upright. The reality of the situation hit him harder than a physical blow. He wasn't just going to prison. He was going to prison a debtor. He would never have a dime to his name for the rest of his life. Every cent he ever earned, if he ever saw the outside of a cell again, would be garnished. "You set us up," Cynthia screamed, scrambling to her feet. Her eyes were wild, manic. You tricked us. This is fraud. You can't do this. It is not fraud if you sign it willingly, Sarah interjected calmly. You had every opportunity to read the documents. You chose not to. You chose greed. Sarah turned to the chief of police. Chief, she said, her voice all business now. In addition to the conspiracy charges, I believe you will find an active warrant for a Mr. Kyle Vance out of Nevada for grand larceny and identity theft. She pointed a finger at Jason. That is him. The air in the room shifted. The financial execution was over. Now it was time for the criminal one. Jason saw the officers move. The instinct of the con man took over. The fight or flight response kicked in and he chose flight. He lunged. He didn't go for me this time. He went for the French doors leading to the terrace. He moved fast, fueled by the desperate adrenaline of a man seeing his life end. He shoved a heavy armchair into the path of the nearest officer and sprinted for the glass. He didn't make it 3 steps. The officer he had tried to block was younger and faster. He tackled Jason with the efficiency of a linebacker, driving him into the floor with a bone-jarring thud. Jason groaned as the wind was knocked out of him. 2 more officers were on him instantly, knees in his back, twisting his arms behind him. The click of the handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Get off me, Jason shouted, his face pressed into the rug. You can't do this. I know people. You are going to know a lot of people where you are going, son, the chief said, hauling him up by his collar. Mostly people you owe cigarettes to. Jason looked at me as he was dragged toward the door. His eyes were wide with panic. Bill, please, I can testify against her. I can tell you everything. It was her idea. She made me do it. I looked at him with zero sympathy. You already told me everything, Kyle, I said. I have the recording. I do not need a rat. I have the trap. They dragged him out, his protests fading into the hallway. Now it was Cynthia's turn. She stood in the center of the room alone. Her lover was gone. Her fortune was gone. Her mask was gone. She looked at the officers surrounding her, then she looked at me. She didn't run. She didn't fight. She just started to shake. Mrs. Harper, the chief said, stepping forward with a pair of cuffs in his hand. You are under arrest for the attempted murder of William Harper, conspiracy to commit murder and spousal abuse. No, she whispered. No, I took care of him. I loved him. We have the toxicology report, Sarah said, holding up the plastic bag with the blue pill. We know about the digoxin. We know about the sedatives. We know you have been poisoning him for months. Cynthia's face crumbled. The reality of the evidence, the hard science of her crime, broke through her delusions. She let out a wail that sounded less like a human and more like a wounded animal. It was a high, piercing shriek of pure despair. She lunged toward me, not to attack, but to beg. She fell at my feet, grabbing the hem of my trousers with her manicured claws. Bill, please, don't let them take me. I am your wife. We have 10 years, Bill. 10 years. Doesn't that mean anything? I looked down at the woman I had shared my bed with, the woman I had trusted with my life, the woman who had looked me in the eye this morning and handed me death in a porcelain bowl. It means everything, Cynthia. I said, my voice cold and hard as the stone of my heart. It means 10 years of lies. It means 10 years of theft. It means you wasted a decade of my life waiting for me to die. I pulled my leg away from her grasp. You wanted to be a widow, Cynthia. Well, today you are. You are the widow of your own greed. Get her out of here, I told the chief. The officers grabbed her arms. She screamed and kicked, her heels scraping against the floor, leaving black marks on the wood. She cursed me. She cursed Emily. She cursed the day she met us. As they dragged her through the door, passing the stunned guests who had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the commotion, she looked back one last time. Our eyes met. And in that moment, I saw the light go out in hers. She knew it was over. Truly, finally, over. The library was quiet again. The only sound was the heavy breathing of Emily, who was still standing by the window, her hands gripping the curtains. Sarah let out a long breath and slumped slightly against the desk. "Well," she said, adjusting her glasses. "That went better than expected." I walked over to the desk and picked up the bottle of scotch. I poured 3 glasses, one for me, one for Sarah, one for Emily. I walked over to my daughter. She turned to face me. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry. She took the glass from my hand. "Is it done?" she asked. "It is done," I said. "They are gone, and they are never coming back." She looked at the empty doorway, then at me. A small, trembling smile touched her lips. "We won, Dad," she whispered. I clinked my glass against hers. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "We won." I took a sip of the scotch. It burned, but it was a good burn, a cleansing burn. The house was empty of traitors. The air felt lighter. I looked out the window at the lake shining in the afternoon sun. I was 70 years old. I had a bad heart. I had lost my wife. But as I stood there with my daughter and my loyal friend, I felt stronger than I had in years. I was William Harper, and I was just getting started. The silence that descended upon the Harper estate was absolute. Just an hour ago, the halls had been echoing with the frantic whispers of the social elite, the clinking of silverware, and the smooth notes of a saxophone. Now the only sound was the distant hum of the catering trucks driving away down the gravel path. The guests had fled the moment the handcuffs clicked shut. They scattered like cockroaches when the kitchen lights turn on, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal, terrified that the police might start asking them questions too. I stood in the center of the library for a long time, just breathing. The air tasted different now. It was no longer thick with deception and perfume. It tasted clean. It tasted like an empty room that was finally ready to be filled with something real. Sarah had left 20 minutes ago to handle the booking paperwork at the precinct, promising to call me if Cynthia tried to make bail, though we both knew with the attempted murder charge she would be rotting in a cell until trial. I walked out through the French doors to the back terrace. The sun had begun its final descent, painting the surface of Lake Geneva in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange. It looked like the sky had been in a fight too. I found Emily sitting on the cold stone steps leading down to the lawn. She had kicked off her designer heels, and they lay discarded in the grass like fallen soldiers. She was holding a bottle of Dom Perignon, the very same vintage Jason had cracked open in the pool house to celebrate my premature death. It felt fitting that we should be the ones to finish it. I sat down next to her. My knees cracked, a reminder of my age, but my heart felt lighter than it had in a decade. I didn't say anything. I just reached out and took the bottle from her. I didn't bother with a glass. I took a long pull, the cold, expensive bubbles burning pleasantly on their way down. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and passed it back to her. We sat there for a while, passing the bottle back and forth, watching the fireflies begin to dance over the lawn. It was the first time in 3 days we didn't have to pretend. We didn't have to whisper. We didn't have to act. Emily set the bottle down on the stone. She looked down at her dress. The custom lace bodice, the hand-stitched pearls, the miles of silk tulle that had cost more than most people earn in a year. It was a beautiful dress. It was a dress meant for a fairy tale. But now in the fading light, it looked like a shroud. "I hate this thing," she said quietly. She grabbed the heavy fabric of the skirt in both hands. Her knuckles turned white. With a guttural grunt of effort, she ripped it. The sound of tearing silk was loud and violent in the quiet evening. She didn't stop. She clawed at the layers of tulle, ripping the long, elegant train away from the bodice until the dress was tattered and uneven, hanging around her knees like rags. She gathered the bundle of torn fabric in her arms and stood up. She walked over to the large outdoor fire pit where the staff had laid a fire earlier in the evening for the guests. Ideally, we would have been toasting marshmallows. Instead, Emily tossed the white silk onto the glowing embers. We watched as the fabric caught. It curled and blackened the lace, dissolving into ash, the pearls popping in the heat. The smoke rose up, carrying away the last physical remnant of the lie she had lived for 2 years. She watched it burn until there was nothing left but gray flakes floating on the breeze. Then she turned back to me and sat down again. Her face was smudged with ash, her hair was falling out of its pins, and I had never seen her look more beautiful. "Dad," she asked, her voice soft, barely audible over the crackling of the fire. "Are you sad?" I looked at her. I knew what she was asking. She wasn't asking about the money or the scandal. She was asking about the woman who had slept in my bed for 10 years. She was asking if my heart was broken. I thought about Cynthia. I thought about the first time I met her, how she had charmed me with her apparent simplicity. I thought about the vacations, the dinners, the quiet moments that I had foolishly believed were real. And then I thought about the blue pills. I thought about the look of disgust on her face when she thought I was dying. I realized then that I wasn't mourning a person. I was mourning an illusion. The woman I loved had never existed. She was a character played by an actress who had finally forgotten her lines. I looked at Emily. I saw the fire in her eyes, the intelligence, the ruthless loyalty she had shown in saving my life. I saw her mother in her. I saw myself. I reached out and brushed a smudge of ash from her cheek. "You know, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady, "in business you have to look at the net gain. You have to look at the bottom line." I took her hand in mine. "I lost a wife who wanted me dead," I said. "I lost a son-in-law who was a parasite. I lost a few friends who were only here for the free booze. That is the loss column." I squeezed her hand. "But in the gain column, I found out that my daughter isn't just a princess. She is a genius. She is a warrior. She is the only person in this world who truly has my back." I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, it reached my eyes. "I think I came out ahead on this deal, kid. I think I profited. Big time." Emily laughed. It was a wet, choked sound, and then she leaned her head on my shoulder. We sat there as the stars came out, a father and daughter in the wreckage of a wedding closer than we had ever been. After a while, I stood up. I walked to the edge of the terrace and looked out over the property. The moon was rising, reflecting off the dark water of the lake. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool night air. I wasn't the frail old man anymore. I wasn't the victim. The poison was gone from my house. The enemies were in cages. The empire was safe. I felt a surge of power in my chest, a roar of vitality that had nothing to do with medicine. I was 70 years old, but I felt immortal. I was the lion who had woken up just in time to defend his pride. I had bared my teeth, and the hyenas had scattered. I turned back to the house. The lights were on in the library, warm and inviting. There was work to do tomorrow. There were press statements to release assets, to liquidate a foundation to build. But for tonight, the war was over. Don't ever think that kindness is a weakness. Do not ever mistake silence for ignorance. And never ever underestimate a father protecting his child. Because when you poke the bear, or in my case the lion, you don't just get a fight. You get a war. And I have never lost a war in my life. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded to stand up for themselves. Subscribe to the channel for more stories from the edge of reality. My name is Bill Harper, and I am still standing. Thanks for watching.